Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm Noor Kyle, one of your two hosts.
And I'm not Noor Kyle, and I'm the other one of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
Yeah, there you go. Good job. All right.
Yeah, I
So
said it this time.
you said it this time. Yay. Okay. So whether you're joining us here live or you're rewatching on their replay or whatever it is you're up to with us right now, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. We're very happy to have you. And if you're watching on YouTube, you know the deal. We would love to have your comments. We would love to have your feedback. And we would love for you to become part of our community by subscribing. And one way you can offer us feedback is to give us a like on this video if you enjoyed it. That helps us in myriad ways, and we certainly appreciate that. And we also try to get to your comments and reply with some sort of intelligent response as soon as we can. And you know, we enjoy those conversations. So thank you very much for that, those who have been able to participate along the way. Is there anything else I need to add that with the spiel, Mushtaq?
Not that I can think of.
Nope.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. Like, subscribe, comment.
All that good stuff.
Yeah,
So
there. One of the comments is going to be selected for a special prize, and we don't know which one it is until it gets here. It might be the 5th comment. It might be the 7th comment. It might be the 20th comment. Who knows? But when that comment comes up, the person who did it gets a prize or a surprise.
good luck to you. All right. So we do still have 1 or 2 openings left for the Sweden retreat we have coming up in May, and it should be a beautiful time. We have several people joining us. We have a little bit more room left, so if you're on the fence, we recommend jumping on that as soon as possible. If you have questions, you can reach out to us. All of that information you'll find in the description. That's the sign up for the retreat mailing list to get in touch with us and get the ball rolling on your registration, or you can directly email us and get in touch with any questions you might have. We look forward to hearing from you and hopefully seeing you in Sweden in May. So other than that, we should get started. This is
Let's
an
get started.
interesting talk this week. We are going to be doing a little bit of dipping into, well, Islamic history and how it relates to the Sufi tradition and, in a way, the Gurdjieff work as well, because the Gurdjieff work is inspired by Sufism. So inevitably, there are some connections there. And we're going to be talking about a particularly wonderful, inspiring person from history named Salman Farsi. Is near and dear to our hearts for plenty of reasons that I think we will probably be able to dive into in depth this evening. So, where would you like to start, Mushtaq?
I think that it would be useful to start with a little bit of the historical and biographical narrative.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, Salman Farsi, he was born the same year as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and all like that. But when we say the Prophet, that's who we're talking about. And he was born into a noble, wealthy Zoroastrian family in Iran. He was born and raised around what is now Isfahan. And he was trained as a Zoroastrian priest. He was trained as a firekeeper. People who don't know about Zoroastrianism tended to call them fire worshippers because they have a sacred flame in their temple that never goes out. And part of Salman's job was to keep the fire going and all like that. But he was well educated in all of the traditions of a upper class noble child. His father was a little bit overprotective. and liked to keep him around the house. He didn't want him to wander too much. There, different stories give you different levels of how sequestered he was from the rest of the world. Some make it sound like Siddhartha's story, where his father just didn't let him see any of the outside world. But from other narratives, I have a sense that that wasn't quite the case up until a particular event. So one day, his father is really busy and he needs to take care of some stuff. So he says to Salman, go and take care of the orchard for me. And so Salman takes off, and on the way to where he's going, he stumbles across a Christian church. Now, I should say that this Christian church was not like the Christian churches that we think of today. First of all, this was a church in Iran, in the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire, which means that they were not being harassed by the Byzantine church. And the Byzantine church basically took over and decided what was Orthodox and what wasn't, and came up with the rules. And anybody who didn't follow the rules risked their lives. Books were burned, manuscripts were destroyed, and what became a politically expedient orthodoxy was forced upon everybody who it could be forced upon. But the Romans and the Persians had been at war for 700 years, so the Roman Church had no sway over the Eastern Church. The Eastern Church, there were several varieties of it, but it tended to speak Aramaic, which was the language of Jesus, and have very different views of who Jesus was, especially the Nestorians. In the West, they talk about the Nestorian heresy now, but in the East, the Nestorians were like, oh yeah, sure. They were not considered heretics. And I don't know if this were a Nestorian church, but if it wasn't, it was Nestorian adjacent. The big deal about the Nestorians is they realized that Jesus was not God. He was a human being who was divinely inspired, who was elevated to the heights that a human could be raised to, but he wasn't the deity incarnate, because that would be bizarre. So anyway, Salman spends the day at the church talking with the priest and the congregants, and is moved by it. And he goes home that night, and his father is kind of frantic. He's wondering what happened to him. Did he get kidnapped? Did he get lost? What? But he goes home and he says, I stopped at this church and I lost myself there. And I came to the realization that their religion is better than ours. And of course, that went over like the traditional lead balloon. His father was unhappy, and his father chained him in his room so that he couldn't run off and join the Christians. Salman was able to get some letters out to that church and said, this is my circumstance. Please let me know when a caravan of your people will be leaving for Damascus, because I want to find somebody great to study with and to be a servant to. And so they did, and he escaped one night, got on the caravan and got to Damascus and put himself in the service of one of the bishops of Damascus. This did not go as well as one might have hoped, because it turned out that this bishop was utterly corrupt. He was stealing the alms. He would give these passionate sermons about how we must help the poor and all of this. And he collected up all of these gold and treasure, and he kept it for himself, put a little bit out there so that people would think he was doing stuff. And Salman was watching this, not real happy. And the guy got sick and died. And when he died, Salman went to the people and revealed to them what this guy was really like. They were going to, have this big funeral for him, and he took them to the priest's treasure room and showed him these jars full of gold coins and jewelry. And it's like, look, there's my mother's bracelets that she gave for alms and things like that. The people were kind of upset. And they refused to bury him. They basically hung his body up and mocked it, threw rocks at it. A new priest arrives to take over the congregation. And Salman, rather than being disgusted with the religion, realized that it wasn't the religion, it was the person that was the problem. And so he put himself in the service of this new priest, who happened to be a wise and devout man. And so they studied together for some time. Salman started out at probably 15 or 16 years old when this was going on. He studied with him until this man got sick. And on his deathbed, he said, there are not many people left who practice what we consider the true form of Christianity. So I'm going to send you to Syria to find, to northern Syria to find this one guy, and I want you to go and study with him. And he does that. And again, he studies with this guy, he learns from this guy, who also gets sick and dies. But before he dies, he sends him to Turkey, to Anatolia. And he goes there and he studies and learns all sorts of wonderful things. And this guy gets sick and he sends him to another place. This goes on for some years. Each one of the priests who he studies with on their deathbed says, go over there and put yourself in the service of this man who is one of the few of us who practice our faith. Because at the time, there was a lot of pressure around the Roman Empire to stamp out all heresy, as they called it. And this went on until finally he gets to the last guy. He's sent to this old man who I think this was back in Syria. Was this back in Syria? I don't remember exactly where it was.
Just know that he's been traveling to cities across vast territory. And in that time, it's a slog to get from one, let's say kingdom or city state or whatever to the next. And he's going across
he's traveled from Anatolia and Turkey all the way down to Jerusalem and back. Mm-hmm. And I think that the last guy was actually in Iran. It was back in his own home area. And his last Christian teacher said, there aren't any more like us. There is nobody who teaches the religion of Jesus, teaches what Jesus taught now. They have all disappeared. But he says, I know that there is a prophet coming. He's going to be arriving soon, and he's going to be arriving in the land of the Arabs. And he is going to be found in a city between two lava beds, and the city is going to have many palm trees. And so the man dies and Salman buries him, and then he goes to caravans looking for a caravan who is heading towards Arabia. And he finds one, and he cuts a deal with them. Basically, he gives them everything he owns for to go to the land of the Arabs. Now, halfway along the journey, when they get away from everything, they grab him, they tie him up, and they sell him into slavery. And he is sold from master to master, he said 14 times. The last master was a Jew from Yathrib. And so he brings Salman to Yathrib. For those of you who don't know, Yathrib is the name for the city that we now call Medina. And this
Saudi
was,
Arabia.
in what is now Saudi Arabia. And this was a couple of years before the prophet arrived there. By this time, Salman is about 50 years old. He's the same age as the prophet. And so
they were both, because not everyone will know this, they were both born around 568 CE. So
yeah,
keep that in mind.
Yeah,
so they were born around the same time, yeah.
They were born around the same time. And so that means that Salman has been on this journey for decades and studying from one man after another, and then serving as a slave to at least 14 masters.
So he's older at this point.
Yeah, he's like, about 50.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Young compared to me, but still.
His entire youth has been spent, going all over the place, learning all kinds of things that were, rare knowledge, and having these experiences of being sold and resold all over the region. So he's had quite a bit of unusual life experience. And now he finds himself in this city.
Yeah.
Being
an important thing that I should mention is that the last priest told him that he would know the prophet by three things. One, the prophet would not eat charity, but would eat a gift. So the prophet doesn't accept charity for himself. He will accept a gift for himself. And he has the mark of prophethood on his back.
So those are the three things that Salman is keeping in mind when he's looking for this person. But what is special about this city that he has ended up in, Mushtaq?
Well, it's the city that just happened to have sent an invitation to the prophet to come and live there, because the Meccans didn't want him. Meccans wanted him dead. But the people of Yathrib realized it would be good to have a prophet in their city.
And all this time, too,
yeah,
Salman has been thinking, okay, maybe someday I will find a way to get to this place that was described to me by my teacher, this place between two lava flats, and there's palm trees and stuff. Keep that in mind too in this story.
Yeah. So one day, Salman's up in a palm tree picking dates, and the brother of his owner comes running up to him and says, "Damn these Arabs of this particular tribe." And the guy says, "Why?" And he says, "There has been a man who claims to be a prophet has just arrived in town." And of course, Salman's ears pick up. And he gets very excited, and he comes down and he runs up to the guy and says, "What did you say?" His owner is very upset by this and knocks him on his ass and says, "Get out of here. You have no business even inquiring on this." But Salman is not dissuaded by this. So as soon as he can, he gets himself a day off he goes out and he collects firewood, and he sells the firewood and buys dates. And then he goes to where this supposed prophet is, and he gives the dates to the prophet, and he says, "This is charity for you." And the prophet takes off his cloak and lays it on the ground, and lays the dates on the ground, and calls all of his companions over to eat the dates, but the prophet himself does not eat them. Salman goes, The next time he can get away, he does the same thing, comes with more dates. And he says, "I noticed that last time you did not eat from the dates that I gave you. These dates are not charity, they're a gift for you." And the prophet receives them, and again he takes off his cloak, lays it out, calls his companions over, and everybody, including the prophet, eat from the dates. This is confirmation number 2. Confirmation number 3 is much harder to get, and he doesn't get it until the first of the people who came with the prophet from Mecca dies. And at the funeral, the prophet is wrapped in a couple of shawls to keep warm. And Salman is looking and looking, because he's hoping that the shawls will kind of drop down so he could see his back. They say, and I believe this is probably true, the prophet noticed that he was trying to see, and he purposefully lowered his shawl so that they could see his back. And of course, there was the seal of prophethood on his back, some sort of birthmark, and I don't know exactly what it was, but to them it was obvious. After this, Salman literally loses it. He's in tears, he's crying, he's on his knees in front of the prophet, and the prophet gets his story out of him, which takes a while because Salman is so overcome by this. And he talks about the 30-year journey from his home in Iran through all of these different teachers, and seeking the truth, and constantly seeking the truth until now. And he's like, "Holy crap, I have found the person who can lead me to the truth." He probably didn't say holy crap, but if it was me, I would have said holy crap.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So according to the story, he finds the person he was looking for in the city that he was told to look for them.
Yeah. And of course, if you are familiar with Medina, it is between two lava beds. And especially at that time, the palm trees there were pretty famous. Hence my my background today. I wanted some palm trees for this talk.
Perfect.
And so there was a lot of wrangling to get Salman free of his master. His master set this incredibly high price for him because he hated the prophet. He hated all of this kind of stuff. Didn't want nothing to do with it. So the price for his freedom was 300 palm trees in the land upon which they were growing, plus a buttload of gold.
Yeah, about 1,000 grams of gold.
Yeah, a lot of gold. And Salman was like, "Well, I'm sorry, master," talking to the prophet, "that this is too expensive, and I realize that this is not going to happen, and I will just bide my time and be patient." The prophet calls all of the companions together and says, "Help your brother." And so they all go out and they find amongst themselves 300 young palm trees ready for planting, and a tract of land big enough to hold them, and they buy the land, and the prophet, they dig the holes, and the prophet himself puts each of the palm trees in the holes and blesses them so that they will all grow and be healthy. And The very next day, some rich guy comes up to the prophet and gives him a gift of this. It's described as a block of gold. And the prophet calls Salman over and says, go give this to your master. You're free now. And so he was. And usefully enough, this was, Salman got his freedom maybe a couple of weeks before one of the biggest battles of Islamic history. It's known as the Battle of the Khandak. Khandak means ditch. So here are all of the Muslims hanging out in Medina, trying to have a life, when all of the Meccans in the world show up. They say 10,000 of them, and they want to wage a war of genocide against the Muslims. Now, remember, Salman was educated in the Persian Empire as a noble, which means he had military training. He had studied the text and the treatises on how to fight. And there's this discussion of what the heck to do. Should we hide in the town and fight the Meccans as they come in, or shall we go out and meet them on the field of battle? And Salman says, well, you know, in Persia, when we had to deal with the Romans like this, we would dig a ditch that was wide enough that the horses could not cross. And the prophet thought this was a good idea. And as it happens, you remember those two lava fields? They are like on either side of Mecca. And you cannot ride horses across them. So they just had to dig a ditch across these two lava fields. The back of the town was protected. And the Meccans come galumphing up, and they stop at this ditch and go, what?
Because they hadn't seen anything like that.
They had never seen anything like this before. This was not a part of Arab warfare. And consequently, the Muslims won the battle, and they won it handily. And many great deeds were done in all of this, but it was Salman who came up with the idea that allowed a force that was like 1/5 the size of the Meccan army to prevail.
So dude's got skills, yeah.
Yeah, dude's got skills. And as it happens, when the ditch is being built, and there's so many stories about this, and we don't have time to go into them, but they are so sweet, most of them. But the best one, and the one that's important to this story, is that the people who came from Mecca and the people who had lived in Medina, they were called the Muhajirin and the Ansar. Ansar means helpers. And they were the ones who were in the city and welcomed the prophet and his people. And everybody else was the people who made the hijrah, the pilgrimage from Mecca to Medina. And each of them was trying to claim Salman as their own, because, one, he came from afar, so he had to have been one of the people who came in that hijrah. And then again, he was already living in Mecca when in Medina when the prophet got there. And so he's of us. No, he's of us. No, he's of us, because they were really happy with him. And the prophet came up and he said, no, he is of the al-Bayt. He is of my family. He's not of this group or that group. He is of my house. And that's very important to this story, because there are lots of levels of companions, right? There were the ones who were really close to the prophet, Abu Bakr, Ali, of course, Uthman, Omar. They were all very close to the Prophet. And Salman Farsi. He was welcome in the Prophet's home at any time. And he would spend most of his days in the presence of the Prophet learning and also discussing, because he was a scholar. He spoke Persian, Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, and maybe Greek. And he is known as the father of two books because he understood the gospel, and he was the first human being to translate the Quran into another language. He translated the Quran into Persian. So his level of scholarship was a constant blessing to the community, this community that was very weak by all accounts, who didn't have much, who were on at the near starvation half the time, because the Meccans did everything they could to keep them from making a living. So most of the time when they talk about Salman Farsi, the story ends at the Battle of the Ditch. And they like to leave it there, but it goes on. And we know that he learned everything he could from the Prophet, that he was one of the near companions, that they spent almost every day together. There's a lot of disagreement, especially in the Sunni Shia split, about both sides claim him, which is interesting. And there's a lot of argument about what he did, when, and where. We do know that he was absolutely loyal to the Prophet to the day of his death. We know that after the Prophet's death, Salman tended to withdraw from public life a bit. We're pretty sure that he was not alienated from anybody. And we know that on the deathbed of the first Caliph, Abu Bakr, Salman was there with him. Salman was the one who was sitting with him. And, they exchanged some very important words. We know that he was very instrumental in helping Umar collect and organize the Quran. Because before then, the Quran was in pieces. People wrote it down on, scraps of leather, on bones, on whatever they could find. And Salman was very important in collecting all of this up, organizing it, figuring out which was accurate and which wasn't, cross-referencing every version that he could find. We know that he probably, there's argument about this. He probably was deeply involved in the conversion of Iran to Islam, and that he did it in such a way that prevented the worst that war brings. And I mean, he said to the Persians when he got there, "Look at me, I'm one of you, right? I'm not an Arab, I'm a Persian, just like you." And he's talking to them in Persian. He says, "See that army there? I command that army. They don't own me. I tell them what to do. This is what Islam brings. It brings equality." So you have the opportunity to rise high within the government and the religion, regardless of where you were born. We don't care where you were born. What we care about is your faith. And of course, this is fairly impressive because that we can't understand how radical that is today. That you would have, here's one army, and it's led, its general is a black man. Here's another army, his general is a Persian. It's like the prophet was the first equal opportunity employer when it comes down to it.
And not only there's that, and then there's the added level of these were people who had no blood relatives to support them and lift them up in the community with, nepotism and all of that stuff. They did not have those connections. It really was a advancement based on their contributions to the community.
Yeah, it was a meritocracy. And that's why Salman ended up being enslaved in the first place, is he had nobody to protect him. And in those days, that meant that you could be taken advantage of.
And that was a big part of his story, was he was one of those the smattering of outsiders that were in this community full of Arabs, whether they were Muslim or Jew or Christian. They had some kind of cultural connections and local connections in common, whereas you have someone who's been dragged across the continent and has no sense of place there whatsoever and has to build one from the bottom up. So for him to stroll into a city in his home nation as the general of an army of people who he had to enter into as a stranger, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Some accounts say that he was made governor of Persia at that point, after the Persian surrender. And he told them, look, you don't have to convert to Islam. It's good. You pay the tax, because if you're not Muslim, you can't be a part of the military or anything. So you pay a tax. You pay the tax, you have your religion, life is good. We're all happy. And the thing was, though, that because of the way he was and the way he lived, he was a living advertisement for being a Muslim. And people wanted what he had. He lived in the palace, but he only lived in one room. Just one room. And in that room, he had some eating utensils, a blanket, and like a little chest. He owned almost nothing. He was given a very high wage for the time every month, 5,000 dirhams of gold or something like that. And he took it, he kept like 20 for himself, and then he distributed the rest to the poor, the needy, the helpless, and kept almost nothing for himself. And he was fearless in his prosecution of his own faith. There's a story that during the Caliphate of Umar was going to give a command. And so he goes out, and the words that he used in English would be, "Oh, people, hear and obey." And Salman gets up and says, "No, I will not listen, and I will not obey." And everybody's shocked by this, because this is not just the Khalif, but this is Umar. Umar is known for his temper. Umar does not handle this sort of thing all that well. But Omar keeps his cool. And he asks him why. And Salman says, we fought this battle with these people over here, and the booty that we got from it, because back then that was what you did. If you won, you got to take the loot. He said, the booty that we got from it was this cloth. And you gave everyone one piece of cloth, and you kept two. And that ain't cool. And Umar still didn't get pissed off. And he called his son up and he said, tell them. And his son said, I took my one piece that my father gave me and I gave it to him because he's a tall man. And that one piece of cloth was not enough to cover him. So my gift allowed him to sew those two pieces together. And that's what he's wearing now. And so he did not actually keep two pieces for himself. The second piece was mine and I gave it to him. And Salman says, now I will listen and obey you. So that's pretty ballsy. Yeah, to put it bluntly, you know, you are calling out a man who literally has the power of life and death over you. And it could have gone badly, but it didn't. So some people say that he died while he was still governor. We do know that he spent a lot of time in retreat during the period of the early caliphate. Some say that he died before Ali's caliphate. Some say he died after. And after Ali's caliphate, he had nothing to do with the politics of Islam anymore. He turned his back completely on it. Accounts vary. But that's it. That's the outer story. Any questions so far? I've been talking for a while, which is kind of funny because one of the things that Salman was known for is his silence. If he didn't have anything to say, he didn't say anything. He didn't make small talk. He didn't chit chat. He didn't gossip. He sat in silence until he had something worth saying. So obviously I'm not at his level.
Chris.
This is a remarkable story. I mean, I'm just blown away. What an amazing story. And I'm wondering how nine-sided circles lineage is connected with him. And then you mentioned that's the outer story. So there's an inner story?
Yeah. Funny you should ask that. We don't pay him to do this, folks. He's not just being a shill for us. So during the time that Salman was living in seclusion in various places, he taught. Now you have to realize he had spent his life, his entire life, learning the disciplines, learning the practices of 3 different religions, maybe more, because he was pretty knowledgeable in Judaism. He was definitely knowledgeable in Eastern Christianity. And he was knowledgeable, of course, in Zoroastrianism, and he was knowledgeable in Islam. He was the one who brought a lot of the practices to the people who became Sufis. One of the things that we know about him that is not mentioned very much in the books is that he was associated with the Ali Sofa, the people of the bench. These were people who were outsiders who had come to Medina to be with the Prophet, who had been drawn to him, but had nothing. And so they lived inside the courtyard of the great mosque in Medina, and they slept on the bench that was around the outer walls. And they say Sufi comes from a lot of different places. They say it comes from Sof, which means wool, or Sophia, which means wisdom in Greek, or any of these other things. But I am pretty sure that it comes from the al-Asufa, the people of the bench. Those were the first Sufis. The Prophet put his son-in-law and his daughter in charge of their care and instruction. And we know that Salman also took part in that, and he was a living example of this. He had nothing, just like them. He was an outsider, just like them. He was hungry, just like them. If they didn't eat, he wouldn't eat. And he instructed them. He taught them zikr. He taught them how to do these various things. And he had other students, the most notable of which is a fellow by the name of Hassan. This is particular Hassan al-Basra, who, if you know the history of Sufism, was one of the earliest Sufis. And there are certain Sufi orders who have him in their lineage. We are one of them. It goes from, the lineage goes from the Prophet to Ali, to Salman Farsi, to Hassan Basra, and then down from there. For a number of different Sufi orders, not just us, bunches of them, not bunches of them, a few, more than one, less than 20. And when he was a young man, he sat at the feet of Salman and learned. And when Salman died, they say that Hassan Basra received his staff. And that staff was passed down from teacher to, every teacher gave it to their successor.
So it became like a relic that was
Yeah,
passed.
it was like a relic.
Yeah.
And we know that one of the last places we know where it was when it was given to Yusuf Hamadani, when he was raised to his own sheikhhood.
So like master teacher.
Yeah.
Master of the order at that time.
Yeah. So many of the teachings of Sufism and the practices of Sufism can be traced back to Salman Farsi. The breath practices are attributed to him. What became the 9 precepts started with him. They were added to over time by various different teachers, but he had the first couple, 3 of them. And in his later life, in his late 50s, early 60s, this was what he did. He taught. And so that's our connection to him. And that's why he's so important to us, is he spent his life learning these things and then condensed them, threw away everything that wasn't useful, kept everything that was good, polished it off, rubbed a bunch of Islam on it, and then gave it to anybody who was willing to learn it.
So he was very passionate about the truth. I mean, he went to some extremes to dig into what he felt was right. And made sense and allowed a person to be a good person without going to extremes in asceticism or, being part of worldly stuff. He knew that there was an important middle way there.
Yeah. And he taught that very powerfully. There's a story, I've mentioned this before, but one of the companions of the Prophet, Abu Darda, was made brother to Salman Farsi. And so they lived in the same house. And one day he noticed that Abu Darda's wife was looking pretty ragged. And he asked her what was wrong. And she said, "My husband has no use for this world. He spends his days in prayer and fasting." And of course, what she's not saying is he isn't getting food for us. The kids are hungry. I'm hungry. My clothes are falling apart. I have nothing.
He doesn't really pay attention to me.
Yeah. So that night, they sit to table, and Abu Darda serves a meal to Salman Farsi. And Salman said, "Eat with me." And he says, "I'm fasting." And Salman says, "I will not eat until you eat. I am your guest, and it is incumbent upon you to eat with me." The guy's fast is voluntary, so he has to break it, because if you remember from some of our other talks, in early Muslim culture, the hospitality was a big deal. And so he had to eat with him. And after the meal, it was like Salman says to him, "Now go to bed." And he says, "No, I want to stay up and pray." And he says, "No, go to bed. Your body has rights over you." And then at the third portion of the night, he comes and he wakes up Abu Darda, and they go and they pray together and they do their practices. But after he gets a decent night's sleep. And of course, Abu Darda is a bit put off by this. And he goes to the Prophet and he says, "Salman did this. What should I do?" And the Prophet says, "He's right. You're wrong. Your body has rights over you. Your family has rights over you. And your religion has rights over you. And you have to fulfill all of them." This sets the foundation for how all of us are instructed to be in the world. We are not ascetics. We don't withdraw from the world. We don't live lives of celibacy. We don't live lives of misery and suffering. We don't deny this world, hoping for the next. We live here, and this becomes our place of practice. And that's one of the things that makes Sufism a little bit unique. Only a little bit. So that's one of the things that was important in the transmission of knowledge through Salman Farsi, that idea of living a balanced life. He was known to be utterly compassionate to all living things. He was kind. He was gentle. He practiced loving kindness. He may be the guy who codified the idea of loving kindness in Sufism. And on like that. Without him, there might not have been any Sufis. So that is as a kind of a Ramadan story, the story of one of the hidden companions of the Prophet. And I say hidden because even when I talk with other Muslims, it's like I mentioned Salman Farsi, and a lot of them don't know anything about him. even though without him, the Muslims would have likely lost that battle at Medina and been wiped out to the last person, because that was the intention of the Meccans at the time.
And we may have been left with some very different manifestations of Islam.
Yeah,
You know, if that facet of what makes Sufism was not present, the Islam that we understand today, especially in this space,
yeah.
might not exist at all.
And the Quran might have looked different.
Yeah.
That's a frightening thought. But, he was essential in organizing and in jurisprudence and in hadith. He had hundreds of authentic hadith, of which we still have a lot. Hadith are the sayings of the Prophet that don't fit in the Quran, but are important for one reason or another. Some of them are just about the best way to live. Some of them are literally inspired by God, but not as part of the Quran. So it could be a young man, new Muslim, comes to the Prophet and says, "Oh, Prophet of Allah, what do I do if I am a guest in someone's house and they offer me food and I don't know if the name of Allah has been spoken over that food or not?" Prophet looks at him and says, "Say the name of Allah over the food and eat."
Don't overthink it, kid.
And so some hadith are like that. They're just practical living. Here's how to live life, not be an asshole, get by with everybody, be friends, make your life easy as it can be while still living an ethical, moral life. And then again, some of these hadith are like, I was a hidden treasure and I loved to be known, so I created the world that I might be known. That's God talking. And that's like, whoa. So, and you get all of those. I mean, people collected up everything that the Prophet said and tried to remember it and write it down, no matter how small. And there are books and books and books of this stuff now. And they have very scholarly ways of knowing which are almost undoubtedly true, which are probably true, which are questionable, and which are totally not true, but we have them in here anyway, just because we do.
Someone wrote it down. Let's just tuck it in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So Salman Farsi was involved in that, but he was involved in jurisprudence. People brought conundrums to him to solve. But the most important thing that he was involved in was teaching the inner and outer practices of Islam. The outer practices are, pray 5 times a day, fast, say that there's no God but God, go to Mecca if you can, pay the zakat.
The charity,
things like that. Yeah. The charity, because
the redistribution tax of wealth.
Yeah, we as Muslims are required not to be totally greedy. And there are no tax write-offs in Islam. There probably are now, because but originally they didn't care if you were really, really rich. You paid the zakat, you paid the poor tax. And if you had a lot of money, you paid a lot more. A completely reasonable thing to do. And the money was taken and used for the upkeep of the poor and the elderly and the sick and people who desperately needed it. Because that's what real communities do.
And that's what Salman liked to see. He wanted more of that. more of that spirit being propagated.
So, any questions? Yes, Chris.
So what are some of the shared practices amongst the Christians and the Muslims that we have from Salman Farsi?
I think that probably there are two areas. One is in how one can pray. Especially amongst the Nestorian Christians, they didn't pray 5 times a day, but they had their daily prayers and they had their ways of doing it that were very near to the way Muslims do it and are not at all like the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics do it now, and not like the Eastern Church or the Byzantine Church was. The Byzantine Church did away with a lot of the traditional practices of Christianity. So prayer was one, fasting was another. And fasting is important. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his entire house, said, every illness has, every malady has its medicine. And the medicine for the soul is fasting. Think about that. The medicine for the soul is fasting.
And it doesn't have to be fasting from food. We've talked about that.
Now, there are all sorts of fasts you can do. The fasting from food is the easy one.
For some. I mean, for many, but not all. Yeah.
Oh, there are some people who can fast from food all day, but ask them to fast from being an asshole, and they won't last 15 minutes. Did I say that out loud? I need to fast from being judgmental. But it's so much fun. And the other, the other is in the area of breath practice. Because the Eastern Christians had forms of breath practice that they did with their prayer. And I think that Salman learned them and adapted them to Islam.
Adapted them for Islam, to Islam, yeah.
And we know that these were not innovations, which is a big boogeyman for Muslims today, because the Prophet was around when he was doing this. If they were innovations that the Prophet didn't like, he would have said, don't do it.
He was probably, I mean, Salman could have been like, hey, what do you think about this?
Almost undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Because remember, they talked almost every day.
So we can suspect that it was a collaborative effort that we have these practices that are still with us today. Much to the chagrin of some who would like to debate otherwise.
Yeah. According to the Wahhabis, we're all heretics. None of this ever happened. And if I was living in Saudi Arabia, I wouldn't mention any of this. But I don't live in Saudi Arabia, and they can go get stuffed.
Yeah, so this is not so controversial for us in this space right now, but we do have to remember that there are places out there where talking about Salman Farsi in the context of Sufism would be a hot button subject and would be uncomfortable and inappropriate.
And could get you killed. For some of my students who live in the Middle East, I tell them, do not ever speak of this. Know it, but be silent. Other questions?
Or thoughts?
Don't everybody talk
Yeah.
at once.
Osama, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, not so much of a question, but a thought. So as you shared the story, I recalled that I did hear about Salman Farsi in the context of as a general, or yeah, in the battle kind of
Yeah.
context. But what's so interesting right now when I hear the story again is often when hearing stories of companions or people who went to the Prophet around that time and decided to convert or to adopt to Islam. When I remember either hearing it or the way that it was shared, it's as if everything that that person knows is gone out the window, and now they're just taking this new religion or this new teaching. But now I'm reminded, and as I see it within myself, as I grow, learning from different traditions, but just kind of sticking with the terminology and form of Sufism. It's like, oh yeah, when I'm growing, I don't necessarily say no more of this teacher that I heard, even though that they're not from, Islam or Sufism. I'm taking the gold as it applies to my life. And it seems from the story that you shared, that might be the case for Salman al-Farsi as far as learning from all these different traditions and maybe landing at Islam. And it's such a new and refreshing take because it's very relevant to me personally, and I'm sure to many people who kind of, they're aware of all the different traditions out there, all the wisdom, all the truth, or all the rivers leading to that truth, and seeing how they apply, how that applies to themselves, and see how that applies to myself. So it's a very refreshing story, honestly, and also makes me curious, like, kind of like what Chris asked. What are those exercises? What did he bring with him? What was the growth internally within him to, oh, now there's this prophet that my past teacher told me to look out for. Like, that's such a cool story. It's there's some level of novelty to it too, for sure.
Yeah, and I am pretty sure that Allah, the Most High, the creator of heaven and earth, the one source of all being and all knowledge, does not want you to go out and learn shit and then forget it. It's just, it doesn't make sense. And as the Prophet said, travel even to China for knowledge, right? He didn't want Muslims to be ignorant. And this is why, we had the Muslim Golden Age, where science and philosophy and all of this wonderful stuff was happening all over the Arab world because of these ideas that we need to learn and we need to apply that learning. There's another hadith that I quote in general, which is there are as many ways to God as there are stars in the sky. And the Prophet has pointed out that there have been thousands of prophets, known and unknown, who have brought the message. So it is incumbent upon us not to forget what we have learned, but to learn how to use what we have learned in the highest and most ethical way possible. Does your knowledge make life better for people?
Yes. So that is to the point that I want to make, which is that I think we can dare to imagine that the Prophet really, that Muhammad really appreciated having Salman around and marveled at his degree of experience and insight and wisdom and knowledge that he was able to bring to the table and share in conversation one-on-one with Muhammad. And think, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here to help me better contextualize this thing that I'm trying to share with people.
And that's totally heretical, of course.
Yeah, like, of course it is. I'm daring to say this because I think it's important. I think it's important to say these things and to acknowledge that the community around Muhammad was contributing to this development of what we call Islam in a way that was going to be very unique to the individual. And so we can, I think, dare to imagine that, again, the Islam we have now, beyond what is revealed in all of that, has been fleshed out through the knowledge that figures like Salman al-Farsi was able to contribute to the conversation.
Yeah. And like I said, this is entirely heretical to say. There are places that, and people who would be very upset to suggest that the Prophet might have enjoyed the conversation of an educated man. But if you think about it, it makes total sense. Don't worry, dear, I will not let anybody burn you with the stake.
Well, the truth is worth it, right? At least this is the truth that I hold. Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be one where we're going to get a lot of hate comments, I expect. What you going to do?
What you gonna do?
Publish them. Make fun of the people.
If need be.
Yeah.
Would it mean people are listening to the end of the talk?
There are some people that will listen to the end of the talk just so that they can find the absolute furthest limits of their being pissed off. I know people who do that all the time. It's like, why are you listening to that? Because I want to know what I need to be angry about.
It's tempting.
Yeah.
So,
It's so
do we
tedious, though.
yeah, it is. It is, which is why we try to spare ourselves. So, does anyone else have any further thoughts or questions? Thank you, Osama, for that, and Chris.
Yeah.
I am happy to call on people. before
Yeah,
we
like
wrap up.
Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I've got nothing of importance to add.
Okay,
Damn it.
fair enough. Stephen, how about you? There you go. Yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting talk. I thoroughly enjoyed all of that. Taking it all in, making a few notes. I'll probably check some references, read all about it. Yeah, great stuff. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I can't imagine why anybody would be hating on this, but you know, there's all sorts out there, isn't there?
There's all sorts.
Yeah.
Thank you, though, Steve.
Yeah, and the reason is that we do not follow the orthodox view, neither the Sunni nor the Shia on this.
Yeah.
Certainly not the more conservative views.
Yeah, so we've said something to piss off everybody during this talk.
Well, why not?
Yeah, that's what I figure.
Yeah. Fair play. It's really good stuff, all of it. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Cherie, how about you? Nothing to add. All right. Lavita, do you have anything to add?
No.
Cool. All right. Stunned silence. James, how about you?
And Chris has an interesting comment when
Oh yeah,
James
I'll
is done.
definitely.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to say today, except that now I want to go and go onto Wikipedia and check out the Nestorian Church and to find out more of the history.
Oh yeah, I think
It's
that's
Yeah.
this whole thing.
that's a
That's
fun
what
rabbit
this whole
hole.
conversation is sort of. It's piqued my appetite in that respect. I like the fact that it emphasizes historically that the history you depicted is unfundamentalist. Like the prophet is willing to engage with other people. I only have very superficial impressions of fundamentalist Islam. It seems to be the Quran is the Xerox from God, and it's the whole Islamic.
I'm going to
development.
steal that. I love it. That was great. I'm stealing that term and filing off the serial numbers, giving it a new paint job.
Well, but this also represents the limit of my knowledge. So say you think this look gratuitously wrong, don't be surprised. But any religion of revelation can get a reputation or a self-image of being this kind of hermetically sealed thing that just descends from the clouds, in a way that is somehow isolated from its environment or isolated from feedback or something like that. That it's somehow just no one has any like no one tells the prophet anything. The prophet tells everyone everything else. Sort of. Am I making sense? This is just
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
You
trying to
are.
articulate
And
my emotional impression.
there is evidence in the hadith of the prophet learning information from someone and him changing his mind. So you're not off track. That is something that
Yeah.
has happened, and
And
it's
one
always
of
nice
the
to be reminded of that.
one of the things about the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family and all of his friends, is that he was a human being. He was utterly human. He loved his wife. He was kind to people. He cared about what happened to everyone around him. He's the kind of guy, except that you don't drink, but he'd be the kind of guy you'd want to go out and have a beer with and just listen to.
Osama's laughing his ass off right now. Again, sacrilege, yes, but it's that attitude of him being an open-hearted, interested person in the lives of the people around him and wanting to connect with them and sharing their stories and give and get advice and all of those things.
Yeah, and we know, and this is something that's stressed nowhere else, really. Prophethood was hard on him. It's not like, oh, I'm the prophet now and everything's groovy and God, strews rose petals before my feet and all of this. It's like to receive revelation is, it takes you close to death from what I can tell. Your body can barely stand it. And it's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So here's this guy. He's a decent human being. He's known as being utterly honest and true to his word in all situations. And all of a sudden, one day, some angel shows up and says, hey, you're the prophet. What are you going to do? I mean, this is not something that you have trained for.
You've got no one to talk to about your experience who's going to get the reality of that experience beyond what you can express to them. Yeah.
And unlike the old prophets, unlike Abraham or Moses, those people were withdrawn from the community in certain ways. The prophet lived amongst the people. He was part of the community. He was the center of the community in a lot of ways, but it was community. It wasn't the prophet and everybody else.
On
So
his golden throne.
yeah,
Kind of, yeah, that's
yeah. And it was one of these things. If the community was hungry, the prophet was hungry. If the prophet received a gift, the community shared in that gift. And that's pretty unique when you consider what that means. So the miracle of Muhammad, you know, all the prophets had their miracles. To me, the miracle of Muhammad was in his humanity. And that's why I like him.
Shuri, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, because Mushtaq has just said everything that I would say about what my impression is, because I'm not Muslim, but it's about bringing everything back to the mass of people, because it's not a hierarchy. It doesn't make that you have to have an ambition to be attaining certain levels. This is everyday existence, experience, and how you bring the goodness out of your humanity towards everyone, and being able to demonstrate that, and not to make the practice a form of idolatry, where you're fasting and everybody can see, oh, you're like a Pharisee or something like that. You know, you think this is very important, that it is accessible to all human beings, regardless of gender, regardless of position in community. It is available to all. And the way we conduct ourselves to all humanity is important, so that if our practices in some way make someone feel small or belittle, or you don't attend to feeding your family and make sure you have a right living to take your responsibilities. You have responsibilities, and being the prophet, there is such an enormous sense of responsibility to demonstrate that in every action and every word.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's
Well
get to
said.
Chris's question.
Yeah. Well, I
Or
wanted to see
statement.
if Nancy has anything to
Okay.
say. Then I think it might be best to wrap up.
And Osama's had his hand up too, you know.
Yes.
Well, excuse me.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah. Well, one thing would be just that this is one of those due diligence stories, because he's pursuing knowledge. He's doing a lot of the work, but he's also given good luck of a sort. You know, he's got all these people taking him on his path of learning, and even when he's a slave, he still is doing the right things and getting help.
Yeah, and getting to the place that he needs to be, which
Yeah.
is fairly amazing in and of itself.
Yep. Yeah. We could call it good luck. We could call it grace, and we see that again reflected in the Enneagram, where we invest ourselves and we are met having invested ourselves by the divine, the universe, the powers that be. So that's a great observation. Thank you, Nancy. So I don't know what you were saying about Osama. Did you have another thought you wanted to share, Osama? Sure. And then I want to touch on
yeah.
Chris's thing.
A question, actually. So in general, not specific to Salman's story, but when hearing a historical story, how can I unpack that story so that I can make it practical and relevant to me today? Sometimes when I listen to stories of the past, you know, whether it's a Sufi master, whether it's, you know, a prophet, whatever, like, okay, awesome, great for them. Like, that's great. how can I unpack it? Is there a way that I can
Yes.
unpack that
Um,
story for myself?
In short, that's a long explanation,
I
but
think
in
I might
short,
take note of it. Yeah.
yeah, if you go to our videos, look for a video that is called The Sufi Way of Reading Sacred Texts.
Ah, yes.
And that will give you a detailed method for doing exactly what you were asking. But it's a matter of how do you look at this text? And how do you not buy into the hype? How do you tell as much as you can about what is true? And how do you apply it to your own life?
So maybe we've kind of covered that already, in which case you'll have to take some time with it and then let us know if it answered your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, we may have to do it again because that was a long time ago. That was one
Sort
of our
of,
early
yeah.
talks.
We
Yeah.
might approach it differently now. But great question, Osama. Thank you.
Yeah.
All
Then
right,
I had to
so-
use all of the Turkish words for it because I didn't have any of the Arabic.
Yeah, we might have to stretch those muscles.
Yeah.
Those language muscles. All right. Chris has said, this story seems to reconcile Jesus's teachings and Islam. Wow. And I think there's something to be said about that,
Yeah.
Chris.
The thing is, in truth, there is no need to reconcile Jesus'
Yeah.
teachings with Islam because they are very much. Did you know that Muslims love Jesus?
I
We
mean,
think he is the bee's knees. He is like the coolest guy. The Quran mentions Jesus more than it mentions Muhammad. We refer to him. We look at his teachings. We learn from him. One of our greatest scholars, Al-Ghazali, went and collected all of the authentic hadith of Jesus that he could find and put them together in a book for Muslims to be able to study. So we might have to try and find a reconciliation between the Roman variety, the Eastern or the Western Roman variety of Christianity and Islam. But when it comes to the kind of Christianity that Salman was studying, there's a story. When the Meccans were oppressing Muslims, the Prophet sent a group of Muslims to be safe in Abyssinia, which is now Ethiopia. And the Negus of Abyssinia was giving them refuge. And one of the Meccan chiefs, I think it was Abu Sufyan, but I don't remember for sure, sent a delegation of Meccans over to demand that they be turned over to them and brought back to Mecca to be oppressed a little bit more. And one of the things that the Meccans said was, well, they say that Jesus wasn't God. And the Negus is like the king, right? The Negus goes, what? What's the truth of this? And one of the Muslims recites from Surah Al-Maryam.
chapter
We
from the
have a whole
Quran.
chapter about
Yeah.
Mary in the Quran. And it basically is the Annunciation.
The
It says,
Annunciation,
tell in the book the story of Mary, how she withdrew to the east and placed a screen before herself. And an angel of the Lord came, like a man, perfect in every way. And she said, come not near me if you fear God. And he said, relax, I come as a messenger from your Lord to tell you the good news that you will bear a child. And she said, how am I going to bear a child because no man has ever known me? And the angel says, this is an easy thing for God. And this child will be a mercy to mankind and a blessing to them. And the Negus got down off of his throne. And he walks over and he draws a line with his sandal between two stones and says, the difference between you and me is less than the distance between these two stones in the floor. And he refused to send them off. So early Christianity without the Byzantines was almost Islam.
Wow.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories, actually.
It's a good story.
Thank you for telling that one. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
So here we have a little bit of both, context from history and from Islamic history in particular about this figure who has had continuing influence on our tradition. I mean, mine and Mushtaq's, our lineage down to today, from this person, Salman al-Farsi, who,
Yeah.
like I said, we cherish that legacy quite a lot. And we're lucky to have these wonderful stories that have been passed down about him to share with you all today.
Yeah. And it is said that the staff of Salman Farsi still exists and is still with the tradition. I don't know that this is true because I've never seen it, but I wouldn't put it past these crazy Sufi guys to have found a way to maintain it.
So that's what we got, y'all. Thank you for hanging in there. This was kind of a long one, but hopefully
Yeah.
you found some
Well,
enjoyment.
we
and
don't care
some-
because we don't do this for people with short attention spans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we do hope that it benefits you in some way,
Yeah.
even if it's just being amused for a little while.
Yeah. And I'm going to switch back to
Brady Bunch mode.
Brady Bunch mode here.
All right, everyone. So we are gonna go have some dinner, but we appreciate hanging out with you for this time, and thank you for showing up. And
Yeah. And thanks
you
for coming
watch-
back again, Chris.
Yeah. Yes. And Osama too. And
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you for getting up at
God awful o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. All right, everyone. We can wave to each other and everybody watching on YouTube.
Bye, folks.
And we'll see you
Sunrise
again
in about
soon.
3 hours. See you
Yeah.
later. Bye.
Bye.